title Arthur, and after Professor Ignatieff's lecture, I'm going to be sharing a short Q&A session, so please do start thinking of questions in advance while you're listening. But before we get on to that, I would like to invite another distinguished international academic to the platform, Professor Simon Marginson, who all of you know, I think, is the founding director of the UCL IOE Centre for Global Higher Education. The CGHE is a research partnership of international universities funded by the ESRC and TEFCI. Its researchers are based in 9 countries across 5 continents, and that's just one of the reasons why, as Vice-Provost International, I take an interest in it. Professor Marginson came to UCL in 2013. He formerly held chairs at the University of Melbourne, Monash and Berkeley. He's one of the most cited scholars in the field of higher education studies, and a list of his publications would take far too long for me to read out, so I'm only going to mention one of the most recent, and I can particularly recommend it. It's Higher Education and the Common Good, and it's highly recommended with anybody who cares about the public value of university education these days. And I suspect that is everyone in this room, and that you've probably all already read it. So Simon, please give us our opening remarks as Director of the Centre.
Very kind, Dame Nicola. It's not primarily about me, but let me acknowledge our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Ignatieff, who in a few minutes will deliver this year's Burton R. Clark Lecture on Higher Education, and Professor Michael Arthur, the Provost of UCL, who will introduce Professor Ignatieff. And we're grateful that both Michaels have included us today amongst the many responsibilities they carry out as university leaders. We're grateful to you too, Dame Nicola. Your support and guidance for the Centre for Global Higher Education, or CG as we say, has been most welcome and very valuable. And I must warmly acknowledge Anna Phillips, Connie Ekpenyang, Centre Directors, Deputy Directors Claire Callender and William Locke, our researchers, our doctoral students, all at CG who have helped with this conference. And thank you all for coming today. Colleagues, we meet at a momentous time. Higher education and research are affected by tensions between the national and the global. Research-intensive universities straddle a fault line between the national and the global. We are a product of the nation-building agendas of the state, and we're also closely engaged in global relationships. These are immensely productive for knowledge and learning, but do not create a universal flow of visible benefits for all in the manner of textbooks, public goods, such as street lighting or national defence. So we have something to prove. We have work to do to turn our global work into national and local benefits. This is now an issue in the Atlantic countries, and it's not the same everywhere. Our colleagues in East Asia are less troubled by migration resistance or anti-science or anti-university rhetoric from political leaders. Today's keynotes and the panel on higher education and equality will highlight for you developments, issues and problems in the new geopolitics of higher education. Let me make a few remarks on this larger setting. The rise of China and East Asia, the growth of participation, the expansion of science, populism, unstable policies and global mobility problems, and the resource conundrum facing higher education in the UK. You'll notice so far I have not mentioned Brexit. Oh well, now it's out. Now, despite our English dramas, at global level there are some reasons to be pleased with where the world is heading. First, participation. Consider the worldwide growth of enrolments at tertiary level. The momentum is phenomenal. From 1995 to 2015, the world gross enrolment ratio, as measured by UNESCO, rose from 16 to 36%, with 4/5 of the 216 million tertiary students in full degree programs. In more than 60 education systems around the world, age group participation exceeds 50%. In all but the poorest quarter of countries, tertiary education is expanding rapidly now. Some say too many graduates, but families and students say we want more graduates. We want opportunity. and that is unstoppable. Regardless of the type of political system, governments in the end must support it. So we're seeing a major expansion of educated capability, to use a Marginson's term. And this is a growth of human freedom, a growth in knowledge, skills and competence to navigate the world. In a generation, half the world's young people will be higher educated. The quality, of course, will vary. Some will be formed more deeply than others with more knowledge and skill, but this is a great change, part of the worldwide modernisation process. The surge in science is, if anything, more remarkable. In talking about global science, my data include large parts of social science. The humanities, which are vital parts of universities in all countries, are predominantly national, not global, in terms of global publication and citation indicators. On the world scale, research-intensive universities and the intellectual disciplines that they harbour now operate as a single network, which can be entered freely and is intensively integrated once you're inside. And its positive sum in the way it operates. Within the networking logic, each new party is free to work with anyone else in the world. Established nations and universities do not gatekeep. They nurture new nations and new universities through collaboration and co-publication. With most innovations now sourced from the global science system, not national science, all nations now want to develop their own science capacity so as to access the global system. And there has been massive growth in total R&D investment, total scientific output, and in internationally collaborative papers. Between 2003 and 2016, the worldwide number of science papers, most of them by university researchers, and many of them fed into knowledge-intensive industries, grew by 93%. That's in 13 years, 93%, rising from 1.2 million to 2.3 million. Over the same period, papers with international co-authors rose from 16 to 22%. It's much higher in Europe, where most countries have collaboration rates exceeding 50%. UCL's international collaboration rate is 60%. We are globalised, and we are globalising. We are part of this massive flow of new knowledge, creating incalculable benefits, short and long term, which is without precedent in history. If anyone tells you the essential purpose of higher education is simply and just to produce private economic benefits for individual graduates, tell them to think again. Higher education does much more than that. And knowledge, the reproduction, inculcation and creation of knowledge, is at the heart of what makes universities distinctive as social and educational organisations, as was argued by Burton R. Clark, whose work we celebrate in the annual lecture that you're about to hear. The surge in science is also the formation of a multipolar science system, and many more nations have entered the global network. There have been major developments in research in parts of Europe, in Latin America in the last 15 years, and amazing growth and improvement in China, South Korea and Singapore. The main achievements in East Asia are confined to physical sciences STEM. But in those fields, the top Chinese and Singaporean universities are rapidly approaching the performance of the top American universities. South Korea now spends 4.2% of its GDP on research, which is the highest ratio in the world. China's R&D budget has now reached that of the United States. In only 10 years between 2006 and 2016, the annual number of science papers produced in China rose from 190,000 to 426,000. It's in 10 years. In the first Leiden ranking, China had no universities that produced more than 1,000 high citation papers in the period of the ranking. 6 years later, the most recent Leiden ranking, it had 7 universities producing 1,000 high citation papers, the same number as the UK. In the number of high citation papers in maths and complex computing, Tsinghua is well ahead of every other university in the world. Nanyang University of Technology in Singapore is second. The highest American is MIT at 5th. In physical sciences and engineering, Berkeley and MIT are number 1 and 2, but when physical sciences, engineering, maths and computing are combined, Tsinghua just shades MIT as number 1 in the world in physical sciences STEM. So that has happened. Science power has become more plural, and we all have something to learn from Chinese civilization in its modernisation period. Listen, respect, understand. Those are the keys to learning in a global knowledge system across cultural and geographic boundaries in the common network. Networked global science needs mobility in order to operate, and it needs the free flow and sharing of ideas, data, synthetic knowledge and people. Doctoral research, and especially postdoctoral research, are international. Nativist populism, anti-globalisation rhetoric and migration resistance are trouble for universities and science. Dividing societies on nativist grounds, based on an ugly refusal to respect or understand the other, shifts attention from the gross and growing inequalities of income and wealth in the political economy. It's an axe stroke down the middle of the common public good. It's as sharp an attack on the principle of solidarity as there can be. Without solidarity, how can we make progress on equality or expect to expand our freedoms? And how can we practice constructive international, or for that matter, local relationships? So far in higher education, the free flow of ideas has not so much been affected, though there are problems in some countries. But the pushback against migration and its mobilisation as a tool of political power is another matter. And that is a clear and present danger for us in Europe and North America. In the UK, migration-based populism has given us Brexit, where the sector is losing thousands of present and future talents, as they say in China. And also the Home Office has a chokehold on international education as a result of risk management in relation to migration. So we have the refusal to put in place either a welcome mat to international students or an attractive post-study work visa regime, and we can't grow that part of the sector. Nativist migration, targeting and racism sustain the Trump politics of national identity. It's the pretext for Orban's suppression of civil society and his attacks on Central European University in Hungary. When migration politics spills over into challenges to free inquiry on national security grounds, when it becomes the motor of attacks on Kantian public rationality, when it becomes the motor for attacks on experts and science, we need to find ways to unlock this sphere of free people movement, because freedom of mobility, like all the human freedoms, is a common good that is intrinsically beneficial to all of us. We should never surrender on this point. Of concern also in the UK is the potential for bad policy in a destabilised public system. On one hand, government clamps down on the sector to minimise the risks, to shift the blame downwards and make the populist gesture. On the other hand, it lurches into high-risk decisions with downward effects on quality, like the promise, which was fortunately not carried out, to slash international student numbers by 30 or 40%, and the decision which may come in future to slash tuition back to 5 or 6K without compensatory public funding. Our research on higher education and Brexit tells us that in the next 5 years, depending on the timing of Brexit-related effects, UK higher education will have a special financial problem. Income will be driven down by several factors at once. Cuts to tuition, the loss of ERDF and EIB funding, a drop in EU student incomes in many, probably not all institutions, the possibility of reduced engagement in the European research programs, that's the big one. And income from international students may stay constrained. And that, of course, is the only balancing item we have when there are reductions on the other side. These downward drivers would also further stratify the sector. Some institutions have the resources and the status position to cope better than others. So is there a way to a more financially sustainable future? Well, you can bet that we in CGHE are working on it, and we're also working on migration policy and international students. Rational inquiry does not solve all the political problems. but it sure beats the hell out of the post-truth alternative. In the afternoon, the conference will talk about CG's research projects in progress. Stay to talk to us about our research. Please see this as a participatory forum, your forum. Enter the discussion this morning, this afternoon, whenever you want, throughout the day. Thank you all for listening to my inadequate words, and it's now a pleasure to hand back to Dame Nicola for the main event.